The automatic doors at Lakeside Regional Hospital hissed open just past 6 a.m., the sharp, fresh scent of rain still lingering in the air. The floor inside was still slick from the morning downpour, reflecting the dim light of the early hours. Nurse Allison Keene was halfway through her coffee, trying to shake off the grogginess of another early shift, when the sudden ping of a security alert startled her. Unattended child at the front entrance. Allison blinked, her eyes still heavy, then stood quickly. Most mornings at this hour were filled with paperwork, sleepy patients, and the usual hum of hospital routine. But today was different. She hurried down the hallway, her shoes squeaking loudly against the polished linoleum floors, each step echoing in the otherwise silent corridor. She rounded the corner and was met with a sight that made her stop dead in her tracks. A German. Shepherd, clearly exhausted and mud-caked, stood just beyond the threshold of the front doors. The dog limped slightly, its fur matted and dark with rain, and its eyes locked onto Allison's with an unsettling intensity. Tied loosely to a battered stroller, a little girl no more than 6 years old was huddled in an oversized hoodie. Her face was flushed, eyes closed, her skin pale under the fevered redness of her cheeks. The dog didn't bark. It didn't growl. It simply stood there, chest heaving with exertion, watching Allison as though waiting for her to understand. Security? A voice asked behind her, breaking the silence. Should we call someone? Allison shook her head, her voice soft but firm. No. She stepped closer to the door, each movement slow and deliberate. The dog didn't flinch, but she noticed the subtle shift in its body, its ears flicked, and its tail twitched just enough to tell her it was aware of her presence. She crouched down to meet the dog's gaze, her voice gentle. "Hey there, buddy," she said, her heart hammering in her chest. "You brought her here, didn't you?" The dog blinked slowly, his body tense, but unmoving. There was something about the way his ears shifted, the slight twitch of his tail, that made her pause. It was as though he was silently urging her to understand, to follow through. "I'm a nurse," she whispered, holding out her hand, palm up. "I'm going to help her, okay?" The dog's eyes never left her, but he stepped aside just enough to allow her to approach the girl. Allison carefully reached out to touch the child's forehead and found her skin scalding to the touch. Fever. Dangerously high. She didn't waste any time. "We need a gurney now," she shouted, scooping the child into her arms with practiced urgency. "Get Dr. Blake on call." The EA staff immediately sprang into action, but the dog didn't move. He stayed put, sitting silently by the glass doors, his eyes following every movement, never once breaking contact. Allison couldn't help but glance back at him, her heart thudding in her chest. He hadn't just arrived with the child, he had delivered her. And now he was waiting. The girl's chart read Harper Lane, but there was nothing else, no ID. No emergency contacts, no sign of who she was or where she came from. She hadn't spoken a word since she arrived, and the only thing anyone could confirm was that she had a fever that refused to break. And the dog. The dog who refused to leave. Inside ICU room 4, machines hummed softly. Nurse Allison Keene adjusted the 4-line with her usual precision, but her attention kept drifting to the glass doors where the dog, Sable, sat as unmoving as the machines inside the room. Hours had passed, yet he had not left. His eyes tracked every movement within the ICU, every change in Harper's vitals. Each time her monitor spiked, even slightly, Sable's ears would twitch. On one occasion, when Harper's oxygen levels dropped without warning, the dog stood up, pacing in front of the door, and pawed at it before the alarm even went off. Dr. Mason Blake, who had witnessed this behavior himself, stood beside Allison, shaking his head in disbelief. "That dog knows something," he murmured, folding his arms across his chest. more than we do. Allison nodded, her gaze still locked on Sable. He doesn't blink unless she moves. Where did he even come from? Blake asked, his brow furrowed. I don't know, Allison replied quietly. But he brought her here and he hasn't looked away since. A few nurses had attempted to coax the dog with food and water, but he refused it all. When a volunteer tried offering a blanket, Sable lowered. His head just slightly, but never once broke his intense eye contact with the ICU room. He's watching over her, Allison said softly, more to herself than to Blake. It's like he's waiting for something. Blake was silent for a moment, his gaze shifting from the dog to the monitor that quietly beeped in the background. Or someone. As the hours passed, Harper's condition remained critical, but there was something unsettling about her stillness. She didn't flinch when nurses checked her vitals, nor did she react when they drew blood. Her eyes, though fever-lazed and unfocused, watched everything with quiet detachment as if the world were happening far away from her. The only time she showed any change was when Sable shifted outside the room. Her gaze would always follow him. It was as if he was the one constant she could still connect to. She's dissociating, Dr. Blake explained during rounds. Shock. Probably prolonged exposure to trauma. But she's tracking him. Allison nodded in understanding, her heart heavy. That means something. She knows the dog. Blake agreed, his voice a little softer now. Probably the only constant she's had. Over the next day, Allison tried everything she could think of to engage Harper. She read storybooks aloud, showed her finger puppets, played cartoons on an old tablet. But nothing worked. Nothing got Harper to speak. Nothing except the moments when Harper's eyes fixed on Sable, her small fingers twitching as if reaching for him through the glass. That evening, when the hallways had quieted and the hospital had settled into its late-night rhythm, Allison entered Harper's room to check on her. She found the little girl sitting up in bed, her legs dangling over the side. Harper didn't speak, but her tiny hand was pressed firmly against the window, palm flat against the glass. On the other side, Sable sat motionless, his own silhouette, perfectly still. Their bodies, despite the glass between them, mirrored each other's position. Hey, sweetheart, Allison said softly, stepping into the room. You okay? Harper didn't answer, but her eyes never left the dog. They were perfectly still together, separated only by the thin barrier of glass. She hasn't said a word, Allison whispered later, speaking to Dr. Blake. But she's talking to him. Blake didn't answer right away. He didn't have to. He'd seen it too. The girl wasn't alone in that room. Not really. Detective Kyle Mercer didn't believe in hunches. He was a man of facts, of evidence. But something about the dog, his silence, his unwavering focus, the way he mirrored Harper's energy kept nagging at him. He couldn't let it go. Back at the precinct, Kyle pulled up the data from the microchip they had scanned the night before. There was no registration, no owner listed, just a long alphanumeric string that didn't match any city or state database. Frustrated, he expanded his search beyond local records, diving into federal databases. Then something pinged an old, defunct neural bonding registry. The program's name was Project Solace, a now-canceled initiative aimed at testing emotional synchronization. Between children with trauma and specially trained service dogs, Kyle's eyes narrowed. You've got to be kidding me, he muttered to himself. The dog's original handler, listed as Dr. Reed Kinland, was a lead behaviorist for the program. And beneath that, in field notes, was the name of a child, Harper, age 5. Her profile matched. Sable's training as part of the canine unit. Back at the hospital, Allison crossed paths with Kyle near the vending machines. In his hand, he held a printout. He met her gaze, his expression grim. She's not just familiar with the dog, he told her. She was assigned to him. Allison's throat tightened. You mean this was planned? Engineered? Kyle nodded. She wasn't rescued by a stray. She was tracked, watched, protected. Allison turned her eyes toward the ICU, where Harper sat up in bed, still and silent. One hand pressed gently to the glass. And on the other side, Sable sat unmoving, ever. Watchful. They were built for each other, she whispered. Kyle gave a slow nod, his voice soft. And I think someone wanted to keep it that way until something went wrong. It happened just after 3 a.m. The ICU was quiet, the dimmed lights casting a soft glow on the machines and restless monitors. Nurse Allison Keene had just stepped out to refill her pen when she heard it, a sharp scrape followed by a deep, urgent growl. She spun around, her heart skipping. Sable was on his feet outside room 4, his nails scraping along the linoleum floor as he clawed at the glass. His ears were pinned back, and his whole body trembled. Then came the howl. Low, broken, desperate. Allison didn't wait. She rushed into the room and froze. Harper was pale, drenched in sweat, her lips tinged blue. The monitor hadn't even beeped yet. Code blue, room 4. She screamed into the hall. Alarm bells shrieked to life as doctors and nurses flooded the room. Dr. Blake arrived in seconds, his face grim as he assessed the situation. She's crashing. He muttered, eyes scanning her vitals. Oxygen's plummeting. Fever spiking. Immune responses massive. Outside the glass, Sable paced back and forth, his eyes locked on the girl inside. He pawed at the door, his body taut with anxiety. It took 8 minutes to stabilize her. 8 minutes that felt like an eternity. When the machines finally beeped steadily and Harper's oxygen levels returned to normal, Allison sank against the wall, her hands shaking. She would have coded. Blake said quietly, glancing toward the door. Allison followed his gaze. Sable had lain back down, his muzzle pressed to the floor. His eyes, though, were still open. He was still watching. He knew, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Blake nodded slowly, his expression sober. Before the machines did. Outside room 4, the hospital began to whisper not about the patient, but about the dog who never looked away. The knock on the administrator's door came just after noon. Detective Kyle Mercer stepped off the elevator and saw them, 2 figures in sharp suits, IDs clipped to their belts. One of them, a woman in her 40s with cold steel-gray eyes and a voice that never rose above a whisper, introduced herself. Where? Here regarding subject K9 and the child in ICU room 4, she said flatly. Kyle's brow furrowed. Subject? Federal property? The woman's voice didn't change. The dog is part of a discontinued neural synchronization program, and the child, Harper Lane, is linked to classified research. The administrator hesitated. Kyle stepped forward. With all due respect, this is a hospital. The girl is a minor. And a patient. She's not property. The woman didn't flinch. We have a federal order. Custody of both is being transferred. Effective immediately. Across the hallway, Allison Keene was reviewing Harper's chart when she noticed the 2 figures. Through the window. Her gut twisted. She intercepted them outside room 4. You can't take her or him, she said, her voice rising. Without a word, the woman handed her the papers, cold and unyielding. Authorities signed. Emergency jurisdic. Allison didn't look. At theft folder. She looked at Harper, who was awake now, eyes wide and fearful. Sable was already standing, body between Harper and the door. A low rumble building in his chest. She just nearly did last night, Allison said, voice rising. That dog warned us before the machines could. You want to take the map art after that? Protocol is protocol. Kyle stepped between them. Not without a hearing. I'm filing for a protective injunction. Roe exhaled. You have 24 hours. Then she turned and walked away like it was already decided. Detective Kyle Mercer didn't sleep that night. Instead, he drove to the nearest gas station listed along the edge of the forest, one of the last stops before the road turned to dirt and shadows. He flashed his badge at the tired clerk who barely looked up and requested surveillance from the past. 72 hours. At 2:18 a.m. Femorning, Harper arrived at the hospital. The feed caught movement on camera 3. A silver SUV pulled into the far corner off lot. The headlights clicked off. The driver's door opened. Briefly, a woman stepped out. Kyle leaned in. Dana Rowe. She circled the car once, then disappeared behind the vehicle. A few seconds later, a shape moved inside. The camera zoomed poorly, but Kyle saw it clear enough. A German Shepherd muzzle. Then the muzzle slipped. The next few seconds were chaos. Sable lunged at the window, pawed the door handle, then somehow miraculously opened it. He leaped from the vehicle, dragging a limp child by her hoodie. Harper, he didn't move. Sable adjusted his grip, nudged her onto the sidewalk, and then with hesitation began pulling her down the road. The timestamp matched exactly 4 hours before Harper arrived at Lakeside Regional. Kyle hit pause, sat back and stunned. Silence. It all made sense now. The scars, the bond, the urgency. Hell left the gas station with one goal: justice. By sunrise, he was at the hospital administrator's door, flash drive in hand, fury in his chest. This is attempted abandonment, he said. And that dog wasn't a participant. He was a rescuer. By morning, the hospital felt like it was holding its breath. Agent Dana Rowe hadn't returned, but her threat echoed in every hallway. Nurse whispered. Doctors exchanged glances. Sable remained curled outside Harper's door, unmoving. Only his eyes followed every passing shadow. Nurse Allison Keene stood at the nurse's station, papers in hand, temporary guardianship for Harper Lane. I'm not her blood, she said to Dr. Mason Blake, who stood beside her. But she's not safe if she leaves here. Blake stared at Ephraim. Are you ready for this? No, she admitted. But I've never felt more certain. With Kyle's evidence submitted to the county clerk just after sunrise, the hospital had a temporary hold. 24 hours of sanctuary. No one in, no one out. It was thin protection. But it was something. Harper had barely spoken, but when Allison sat at her bedside and whispered, "You don't have to go anywhere," the little girl reached out, her tiny hand resting on Allison's. Sable watched from the glass, tail fewing gently. By noon, the hospital approved a provisional designation, therapeutic companion, ICU certified. Sable was granted temporary stay privileges. They even printed a badge. Allison clipped it to his collar herself. He's official now, Shesmold, not just a shadow. As Harper drifted into a light sleep, Sable curled at the foot of her bed for the first time. Not behind glass, not on the coal tile, but beside her, where he'd been meant to be all along. Outside, storm clouds gathered again. Rain was coming, but in room 4, for the first time in days, it felt still, not silent, safe. The room was dim, bathed in the soft gold of late afternoon. Sun slipping past the blinds. Most of the hospital had quieted into its usual late-day rhythm. Machines humming, distant page echoing, lives being stitched back together one careful moment at a time. Nurse Allison Keene sat beside Harper's bed, flipping through a well-worn storybook. She wasn't reading aloud, just being there, breathing in the stillness. Harper lay on her side, eyes half-lidded but awake, her fingers resting against Sable's fur. The German Shepherd had claimed his spot at the foot of her bed like it was sacred ground. He didn't move, just watched her like always, present, patient. Then, so softly it might have been mistaken for breath, came the voice. "He never left me." Allison froze, her eyes flicked to Harper, who didn't blink, didn't repeat it, just kept her hand pressed against Sable's back, her tiny fingers moving rhythmically, like tracing comfort from his heartbeat. Allison leaned in, blinking fast. "Harper, what did you say, sweetheart?" Silence. Then Harper's lips moved again, clear this time. Her eyes finally lifted to meet Allison's. "He never left," she whispered. "Even when I was scared." Sable's ears twitched, his tail thump-a-dance. Allison's throat closed around Asab she hadn't prepared for. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Harper's face. "You don't ever have be scared again," she said. And for the first time, Harper believed it. The paperwork came through quietly, without fanfare. By the end of the week, Nurse Allison Keene was granted temporary guardianship of Harper Lane. The legal language was dry, technical. But when the social worker handed Allison the final document, Harper sat beside Sable on the waiting room floor, coloring between the lines of a picture somebody had left behind. She didn't look up, but reached over and touched the edge of Allison's coat. A silent thank you. Sable, now officially designated as a certified therapeutic companion, wore his new vest with calm pride. The hospital staff, once skeptical, had begun leaving water bowls near room 4, greeting him by name when they passed. He had become part of the rhythm. On Friday afternoon, the three of them stood under the old sycamore tree just outside the hospital wing. It was the first time Harper had stepped outside without flinching. She held a small paper kite in her hand. Allison held festering. Sable stood. "Watch." The wind lifted gently. "Can I let go?" Harper asked. Allison smiled. "Only if you want to." Harper hesitated. Then slowly she opened her fingers and let the string dance free into the breeze. The kite fluttered, rising in shaky loops before catching the current and climbing higher. Sable barked once, not loud, just enough to make her giggle. Harper turned and wrapped her arms around his neck. "You're not just my dog," she whispered into his fur. "You're me home." Allison looked up at the sky, blinking back a sting in her eyes. Sometimes family isn't where you're born. Sometimes it's who stays when the rest of the world disappears. 3 days later, a judge reviewed the case behind closed doors. The footage, the medical records, testimonies from Allison, Kyle, and Dr. Blake, even a psychologist asked us of Harper's bond with Sable. Who wasn't even close. The court granted full emergency custody to Allison Keene with a pending adoption hearing set for full. Sable by court order was declared Harper's therapeutic guardian, protected under state and federal law. When Allison got the call, she didn't cry. She walked back into room 4, knelt beside the bed where Harper and Sable rested, and whispered, "It's official, sweetheart. You're home."